Hey guys, this is Micah from Epiem, and welcome to Composite Wednesdays. Today's tutorial is in reference to the movie coming out this weekend called Act of Valor. In the extended trailer, there is a scene where there's a soldier on an aircraft carrier, and I wanted to somehow replicate that scene. As soon as I saw it, it was just something that I was like, that's cool. Now, the problem is, I don't have an aircraft carrier or access to one. So I decided to improvise. I loaded up Battlefield 3. If you've never played that game, it's pretty much awesome. And I went to the Canals map, as there's an aircraft carrier that would fit perfectly for what I wanted to do. I chose the team, got out of the plane, and went to set up the shot. What I wanted to do was I wanted to get enough photos to stitch together a panoramic view in Photoshop using Photomerge. So what I did was I would switch weapons from grenade to knife, just because they're the smallest weapons. And every time I did it, I would use Fraps to screen capture. And I captured a bunch of different images, 13 to be exact, of the jet and the carrier from just multiple points. So that when you put it into Photoshop and use Photomerge, it will pull all of those points and compile a nice looking big panoramic view to give us a better working image for our composite. So let's go back into Photoshop, and I'm going to show you guys how to stitch this together. This will be the image that we will be using. This will not be the same image that I'm about to compile. I'm just going to show you guys how to use Photomerge. Like I was saying, it took quite a while to get the exact one that I wanted. So this one is pretty much exactly what I want. So this is the one we'll be using. But I'm going to show you how to Photomerge. So go to File, Automate, Photomerge. And we're going to leave the layout on auto. We're going to choose the files, and they're all under here. So once we have all of the files, we have only blend images together, ticked, nothing else, and we hit OK. And what it will do is it will take a couple seconds here and import all of the photos and basically mask them all out so they're in one huge panoramic view. The reason why you want a bunch of different photos is because it will give you higher resolution, meaning that you can crop down or crop it to whatever you're looking for. So if you want a specific look, you can just take part of that photo and you have a lot more options to work with. So here's the completed panorama. It's close, but it's not quite the same as the other one. It still came out pretty good, much better than the past ones that I've tried to render out. Anyway, we're not going to be using that one. We're going to be using our one entitled BF3 carrier.psd. And as you can see, I've also fixed the clouds a little bit. I'm not really going to go into how I did the clouds, as it's kind of irrelevant. It might not work for whatever application you're doing, so for sake of argument, what I did use to make it happen was the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool. And I just basically brushed it out until it looked nice. So I'm gonna look around the shot here a little bit, just kind of check out the quality. I mean, even at 400%, it's pretty decent. And as you can see, we got a lot of room to play with. The quality is really nice. So pretty good resolution off of this. Not bad for a video game screen capture, eh? So for this tutorial, I'm not going to do a history tab for the end like I normally do, just because it will take too long. We're going to be jumping through programs for this particular tutorial, so I'm just going to leave it open now and you guys can follow it as we're going through. And this is the photo that I'm going to be taking and putting it into the carrier photo. This is what we're going to composite. I looked all over the house for over an hour to try and find something that I could use that resembled a walkie-talkie. And after running around and not finding anything, I finally grabbed a hairbrush and decided, you know what, we're just gonna have to make do. And it worked out to an extent. Later on, we'll get rid of the handle and make it look a little bit more like a antenna. And as far as the outfit goes, I couldn't find any fatigues. I called all of my friends, but no one was available until the weekend, and that just wouldn't work out for our time schedule. So I had to improvise. I decided to grab my snowboarding jacket and our Black Rapid camera straps and just throw that on to make it look kind of like a backpack / parachute, flyboy, Navy SEAL, Air Force type of something. I mean, the colors were blue and white, so I figured it would work out better than me wearing a turtleneck. Anyway, let's get to this tutorial and see what we can do. So I'm going to start out by duplicating the layer. And I'm going to go over and choose the magic eraser tool. And my tolerance is on 50. And I'm going to go back to the original layer, click on background, make a new layer, and then I'm going to fill that layer with 50% gray, just so I can see if there's any errors when I remove this background. So then I'm just going to click anywhere around to remove the green, and it will get rid of pretty much everything. This was a pretty good key. And also get rid of the circle on the edge of the hand brush. Now let's clean up my hair just a little bit. And I'm going to get the background eraser tool and make sure it's on discontiguous. And just click a couple of the areas where there might be problems later. For the most part, it's pretty decent. Now let's take the brush tool and put it on color. And we're going to check the opacity, make sure it's 100% for now. And what we're going to do is lock transparency on that layer, and we're going to choose a part of the hair that's a decent color and just kind of brush it out and make sure that it gets rid of as much green as possible. And just continually clean it up until it looks as real as you can get it. I'm going to add an adjustment layer, hue and saturation, and choose the drop down for greens, change the hue a little bit, and drop the saturation as far down as possible. Then we're going to go back to the layer and start cleaning up the rest of the image. And we want to just select different colors and start brushing things out until it looks correct. Now we need to get rid of this Black Rapid logo, as it's not fitting for our photo. But first we need to remove a couple blemishes or lint from my jacket, so we'll grab the spot healing brush and just pop those out. And clean up other parts of the image that may have some problems. Now let's remove this logo. We're going to start with a healing brush and just see how that works out. Might not work perfectly. Select a specific area and just kind of brush it out. Well, that doesn't seem to be working all that great. So we'll choose the clone stamp tool instead and basically just stamp it out as close as we can. Make sure that all of the little areas line up. After a little bit of work, that looks pretty good. Now let's make this hairbrush look a little bit more like an antenna. First, let's get rid of this hole. So we want to turn off transparency lock, and then we want to hold Command or Control and select the entire layer of layer 1 and use the lasso tool to remove the selection around the hole. Then we're going to choose the stamp tool, and we're just going to basically get rid of this little hole here. Once we have that cleaned up, we'll grab the healing brush and just further blend it. Once that looks a lot better, we'll grab a regular brush, change it to darken, and put the opacity about 50–57%. And we'll just start brushing out parts of the end of this to simulate the shadow and to also get rid of any other discrepancies from the clone tool. Yeah, using a hairbrush for this kind of cracks me up. I wish I could have found a walkie-talkie, but it just wasn't happening. I love having to improvise for things like this. It really uses your imagination, and you can pretty much take anything around the house, and with a little bit of Photoshop or composite skills, you can change it into what you want it to look like. And there's a little blemish here, so we'll just go ahead and lasso that out and delete it. Now we're going to extend the end of the brush here so it's more like an antenna. So we're going to lasso out a specific part of the end of the brush, and we're just going to go ahead and use Command J to duplicate the layer, and it will pull out the selection. And we're just going to move it up slightly, and then duplicate the layer, and then move it up slightly, and then duplicate the layer, and so on and so forth until we get a decent looking extension. Then once we have the extension that we like, we're going to click on the first layer, layer 1, and we're going to add a layer mask, and we're just going to brush out the end of the brush behind that layer to get the edges to pop on each of our brush copies. You can use the eraser tool if you messed up on a certain part. And then click layer 3 and add a mask to that and do the same thing. Continue to clean it up, try and get the edges to look as perfect as possible, and then choose layer 3 copy and do the same to that layer. And then choose layer 3 copy 2 and basically clean up any bad edges or whatnot. This is going to be your top layer, so you don't want to remove too much of it, as it's the final edge of the brush. And just go back and clean up any discrepancies you might have. So let's take all of these and group them together, and I'm going to change the name to comp just so it's there. I'm going to duplicate the layer, then I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to merge the comp copy with the new layer so that it's an all new layer by itself on layer 4. And we have the comp there just in case we need to go back and edit something. So now let's lasso out the end of the brush, as we want to give it kind of a twist and make it a little bit thinner so it looks more like an antenna. Once we have it lassoed, we'll duplicate the layer and we'll just kind of pull it in. Make it a little bit thinner. And we'll transform it and warp. And let's give it a little bit of a bend. That looks pretty good. Now let's go back to layer 4, add a mask, and brush out that whole side of the end of the brush that looks like an antenna so that it blends nicely. And it's starting to look a little bit more realistic, even though it's still a hairbrush. And just clean up anything that you might have missed. That's looking pretty good. But now we have a slight problem with the gradient of the brush. It doesn't look natural. So we're going to choose a brush, put the opacity at about 33%, and choose layer 5, and add a layer mask, and just liberally brush out the line between the new layer and the old layer, and it will just kind of feather out the gradient so it looks a lot more natural. Now that looks pretty good, and there we go. So now I want to add a backpack that looks kind of like a comm unit. So what I did was I just Googled for a Linksys wireless router, and I found this particular router. It looks the best and it's at a pretty decent angle. And then we need to add an antenna to the other side of it, so I also Googled an antenna and found this one. I'm not going to go through the steps of how I made it look like this, so I'll just open the group tab and you can see what we did. I just added a channels mixer with monochrome and then used 2 different exposures to make it dark. And for the antenna, what I did was I just used transform warp and changed it into kind of a stubby angled antenna. And then I took that antenna and put it on the top of the Linksys router. So let's copy the router and paste it into this image. And we're going to move that router layer, which is layer 6, beneath layer 4 of my body. And we're going to transform it, make it a little bit larger, and position it to where we want it to be. Here's a disclaimer about using images from the internet. Copyright is a very delicate issue. You do not want to just steal people's images from the internet and use them for whatever you want. The reason why I use this particular image is because you're not going to see any labels and all you're going to see is the very corner of it. And even with the antenna that I added onto it, if someone were to look at the image, they wouldn't be like, oh, that's a Linksys router. I'm not saying that you should go out and use other people's photos. You definitely should not do that. You should give credit and always ask permission to use things like that. We have a problem with the corner of this looking a little too dark. So we're going to add an exposure layer and attach it to layer 6. And we're just going to bump up the exposure a little bit to get the shine back on the corner. But we have a problem where the antenna is kind of popping out, so we're going to add a mask to it and just brush out that area so it's dark so it blends again. Now we're going to take all of the layers and group them up once again. And we're going to duplicate that group, make a new layer, and then merge the group 1 copy with layer 7. And now we have the image all by itself, complete. Looks pretty good. So now let's take the entire image and copy it. And we're just going to paste it into our BF3 carrier, our Photomerge project. Now I want to make some guides to kind of work within, and I want to keep the aspect ratio at a 16:9, somewhat of a letterbox or movie aspect ratio, so it fits with the whole idea of this coming from the movie Act of Valor. But 16:9 is a little bit too small for this image just because of the resolution. So what I did was I multiplied 16 by 2.25, which gives me 36 inches, and then multiplied 9 by 2.25, which gives me 20.25 inches. So when I click on the image, we get a really decent sized marquee. And then we'll just drag the guides out from each corner. And deselect. And this is the approximate frame that we want to be working within. Now let's scale down layer 2, the image of me, and fit it into this composition. We do want kind of a movie feel, so I want to cut off a bit of the top of my head and make sure that it's nice and tight. Now the perspective for me isn't working quite right. It looks too fake. It looks like I'm just kind of looking off into nowhere, so I want to pull the perspective out a little bit and give it a little bit more depth. So I'm going to select the layer 2 copy 10, and I'm going to transform it and use perspective and just pull it out until it looks a little bit more realistic. Like I'm actually standing there looking at the plane or the pilot or down the runway. That looks a lot better. Nice long perspective. Move the layer over just a bit. Position it a little bit nicer. And here you can see the difference between the two. So the perspective looks a lot better. Now I'm going to command select my body out of layer 2, and we're going to go to select, modify, feather, and we're going to feather it just a couple pixels so that my body blends in a little bit better. So I'm using 5, and select inverse and just delete it a couple times, and then deselect it, and that's a little bit too much. So I'm going to go back to the first clear and deselect it. See how that looks? A lot better. The other one feathered just too much. So now I'm going to add a layer mask and zoom in and just kind of brush out the edges to make it blend better. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now let's start working on the color of the image and try and get the composite to feel more like it's one image. So let's start out with an adjustment photo filter, and we're going to attach it to layer 2, and we're going to pull up the density a little bit just to change the color of my body so that it's a little bit more orange. Then we're going to add a second photo filter, and we're just going to leave that over the entire image of myself and the carrier, and we're going to pull up the density on that just a bit as well. And then we're going to go back to layer 2, and we're going to add an exposure and bring down the exposure just a bit and bring up the gamma so that it mellows out the highlights and the midtones and lets us get more contrast out of the curves adjustment. So now let's add a curves. And we really want to punch it. So I'm gonna bring a pretty decent curve on this. And then go back to layer 2, copy 10. And we're also gonna add a curves on that to get the contrast quite a bit higher. We want the image to really pop, but we also want it to match the layer 2 composite of myself. Now it's starting to feel pretty believable. Now let's select layer 2, copy 10 and duplicate the layer. And we want to add a blur and a lens blur. We'll go ahead and use the default settings and apply it. And what it will do is it will add a lot of depth to the background. And we want to take the opacity down to around 42 so that the background's kind of blurry, but it's not completely out of focus. And that will give us a lot of depth of field. One thing that was bothering me was the jaggedness of the backpack with the comm control unit. So we're going to select layer 2 and we're going to zoom in and we're just going to kind of clean this area up. So we'll select a brush and choose darken. Make sure you are selected on the layer and not the layer mask, otherwise this will not work correctly. And just kind of brush this out to clean it up. I should have done this earlier. I missed it until we started bumping the contrast. That's looking pretty good. Now let's choose the top layer, which is Photo Filter 2, and we're going to add another fixed size marquee. And we're going to make a new layer and use the paint bucket and just dump black on it. And deselect. Now we want to go to filter and we want to add some noise. So let's go to noise, add noise, use Gaussian and monochromatic. Click OK. It's kind of tight, so we're going to transform it and pull it out a little bit. See if we can get the noise to be slightly larger. That looks a little bit better. So now we want to go to blending option screen and bring down the opacity almost all the way. We want just very slight amount of noise visible. Then we want to go add a photo filter and choose color to just layer 3, your noise layer. And that looks pretty good. Now let's add another curves on top of the entire image, and we're going to kind of pull it into an S curve, really punching it now so that the image is one solid image and it looks quite realistic as far as the composite goes. Like it almost belongs, or like it does belong. And let's take a look at what it looks like by choosing another fixed size marquee and adding a new layer, and select inverse that layer, grab your paint bucket and dump it on the outside. And this is pretty much what it looks like so far. So now let's group the layers and duplicate it. Make a new layer and merge that new layer with group 1 copy. And now we have just a flattened image. We're going to choose fixed size and make another marquee and select inverse and clear the black, and now we have the image by itself. So now we want to copy the entire image and copy it and make an entirely new document, Command N, and then paste in that document. And we want to go ahead and file save as, name it whatever you need to name it, and save it. Now the reason we did this is because we want to take it into After Effects to add the flare to give it a little bit more depth. But the problem is, if we import into After Effects the file with all of the layers, it will take forever, literally forever. So making an entire new document with just that one layer, it will take like no time at all. So here we are with After Effects loaded up, and we want to pull the carrier to AE, which is the image that we just saved, into After Effects. Now the import kind is going to be composition. We're just going to leave the layer options as they are and hit OK. So After Effects already makes the comp for us, and we want to right click the comp and check out the composition settings, because depending on how you were using After Effects before, it might have changed your duration. Now we want to make sure that the duration is only on 1 frame. If you have it longer than that, it will take quite a while to export, and really, you only need 1 frame. It's a still image. So if it isn't 1 frame, change it to 1 frame, and then hit OK. Now click your layer 1 in your composition. We're going to select Layer, New, Solid, and make sure that it's comp size. If it's not, just hit comp size and make sure that the color's black and hit OK. Now we're going to change the mode of that black solid to screen. We're going to add Effect, Video Copilot, Optical Flares, because we want to add a really cool flare in here, and I just don't want to take the time with Photoshop to make a flare to mimic this. Video Copilot, Optical Flares is awesome. If you use After Effects, you should definitely buy that plugin. It's pretty much the best thing since Red Bull. Now I'm going to set up the flare to where I want it to cast, and I'm going to put the position close to my face and have the position of the lens flare near my pinky. And if for some reason the flare's not showing up, just untick Use GPU and it will pop up. And we want to change the flare from the stock one by choosing Options. We're going to use Natural Flares, Golden Light. I'm going to change a couple things in here. I'm going to remove the first glow. The second glow, I'm going to hit Reset. I'm going to remove the hoop by the glow. I'm going to remove the shimmer and the spike ball, as they just blow out the image way too much. And then hit OK. And as you can see, it's a nice orange tint, and it has a rainbow lens flare. I'm going to change the brightness down to about 90 just so it looks a little bit more realistic. It's not overly bright. And adjust it a little bit closer to my face so that we get a nice cast off from the flare itself. So now I want to render this out. So I'm going to go to Composition and Make Movie. I'm going to change my output, make sure it's in the right folder. Change the name back to Photoshop, just so I know where it's going. And then I'm going to choose Photoshop as the output module and hit render. And it's going to pop out an image to the directory that you specified. And then we're going to take it back into Photoshop. And this is pretty much our image. But there was one thing that was really bothering me about this image. You might not be able to see it on your laptop or certain monitors. If you have an IPS monitor, you can tell. Or if you look at the monitor from an angle, you can tell. Right by my head, there's kind of a blown out spot from using that optical flares for the still image. So I'm just going to clean it up by duplicating the layer and zooming in and choosing clone tool and just kind of cleaning up that area around it. This is totally something that you don't have to do with your image. This is one of those things that just kind of bothers me. I'm kind of OCD about things like this. If I turn my head, I can see that there's a color variation and it just bothers me. So I'm trying to clean it up the best I can. And also, when I'm really proud of an image, I tend to spend more time making it as perfect as possible. So that's why I'm kind of going the extra mile on this. I really like this photo. So here is your completed image, and after this I'm just going to take it into Lightroom and export it out with the logo on it. And that's pretty much about it. This tutorial was kind of long. It's definitely an easy tutorial, as you're pretty much just keying and adjusting things to look like it's composited. I took a couple extra steps that I haven't seen anyone do before, which was using a video game to create the image. I've never seen anyone use a Photomerge and make an image from a video game to composite something into. I thought, as soon as I thought of that, I thought it would be really cool to try out, and hopefully there will be some people out there who come up with some really creative images or ideas from that. So I'm really glad that I was able to bring this to you guys. This is by far one of my favorite images in a long time. I'm really stoked for this one. I think it came out great and really displays the things that you can do by cross-platforming, so that you're not limited to just Photoshop or just After Effects or anything like that. You can go between programs and come up with a really cool image that you use each program for the best of its capability. Don't limit yourself, and if you can, cut corners that look good, because making an optical flare in Photoshop would have just taken too much time, but throwing it in After Effects only took an extra couple minutes, and that was just awesome. Make sure to check out this photo on Flickr. Our username is epiem, and if you guys want to frag sometime on Battlefield for PC, our username is epiem. Look us up, add us, let's game. And that should do it for this week's tutorial. Next week we have something special in mind, as it's leap year, and we want to do something kind of cool for that. We appreciate you guys checking us out, and make sure to subscribe for future tutorials and short videos. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.